Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual Knowledge at Noon program. I'm Jenna Harris, Education Manager for YOLO Arts. Just a reminder, please mute your microphone and video so we can ensure a smooth streaming experience for all. Our Knowledge at Noon program is a free monthly speaker series featuring artists, historians, and agriculture professionals that explore themes central to YOLO Arts and Yolo County Historical Collection exhibitions at the Gibson House and property. Today's talk will be given by Glenn Cole with UC Davis's Strawberry Breeding Program. But before we get started, I am pleased to announce that we will be holding our 13th annual Art Farm Gala on October 10th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. This year will look a little different from Art Farms past, but will hold the same spirit of bringing the beauty of farmlands and artistic expression to the community. Our virtual art farm can be enjoyed from the comfort of your living room, where you can harvest artwork, bid on the silent auction, watch video presentations, and enjoy music by DJ Shar Ramos. Pre-ordered picnic boxes filled with YOLO Bites will be available for purchase during the Art Farm Gala. This gala supports the Art and Ag Project and our partners, the YOLO Land Trust and YOLO Farm to Fork. The Art and Ag Project creatively connects artists, farmers, and the community to celebrate local artists and farmland in Yolo County. Be sure to visit the YOLO Arts website for more information on the event and how to sponsor. Now back to today's topic, Knowledge at Noon. We are going to host a moderated Q&A at the end of today's presentation. To submit a question, please click the chat icon at the bottom of your computer screen, or if you're joining us by phone, click More and then Chat. During the presentation, I will monitor your questions and compile for discussion at the end. Today's speaker, Glenn Cole, is the field manager for the UC Davis Strawberry Breeding Program and has spent the last 35 years in the seed industry working on agricultural research. His experience has spanned the breeding and development of many crops, including alfalfa, wheat, melons, tomatoes, peppers, and sunflower. However, his career focused most on the development and testing of sunflower inbreds and hybrids for the oilseed product markets in North and South America, Europe, and Australia. He has a particular interest in the identification and incorporation of valuable traits from wild species into domesticated crops. Genetic diversity is a critical component to any breeding program, and creatively implementing proper strategies to capture the value of that diversity is the challenge he likes to solve the most. Glenn, welcome to Knowledge at Noon. We are so honored to have you.
Thanks, Jenna. So I guess I'll go ahead and take charge of the screen here and pull up my my presentation, and we'll get started. All right, everybody see that? Okay, well, thanks for having me. I've been a long time supporter of YOLO Arts and was asked to talk about some of my experiences. I decided to talk about strawberry, even though I've only been doing strawberry for about 5 years. And like Jenna had indicated, I worked most of my career working for a seed company in Woodland, working on sunflower that we see out and about in our fields as we drive around. Strawberry, on the other hand, is not really a crop for the valley. The big growing areas of the crop are on the coast. And so my talk today is going to be focused on the University of California's breeding program and the past, the present, and the future. So go ahead and just start here. Let's see. There we go. So a little bit about me. Jen already indicated some of my history. I'm just going to give you a little brief bio of me getting into plant breeding. I'll talk about the importance of the strawberry industry, history of the program, the product development, so important to the industry over the years, and then a little bit about our current research, and then what our planned innovations are. So I have two grandfathers to thank for my interest in strawberries. One being my grandfather on my father's side, who was a farmer in Indiana, had a small farm and he grew strawberries. And so I can remember stories of my grandfather talking about strawberries, and they had a special system of growing it called matted row, and there's a picture there of a matted row system where they tended to grow the plants more perennially, and they would pick fruit one year and then let them runner and go into the furrow, and then they'd make those the beds the next year. And so they didn't replant their fields every year like they do here in the industry now. And so I can remember him, vividly talking about his growing experiences. My other grandfather, on the other hand, was not a farmer, but he was from Scotland, and his favorite fruit was strawberries. So we used to eat strawberries all the time with my grandfather. And so it's always interesting how things can come back. And years later, I turned into be a strawberry breeder. So I'm going to give you just a quick contextual piece of information here on why is UC working on strawberries. Well, for the main reason being is that it's a huge crop for the industry, for the agricultural industry in California. There's 1.8 billion pounds of strawberries grown every year on average here in California for the fresh market, and about almost 500,000 pounds for frozen processing market. And it's a $2 billion crop. It lists in the top 10 of crops for California. So it's a biggie. And 88 to 90% of the strawberry production in the US is grown here in California, and then of course exported all across the United States. The other area that pulls up the rest of that acreage is in Florida, which is more of a winter crop, and they make up the rest of the acreage. So that equals about 36,000 acres. And so you can see that the university program, for many reasons, is still a very viable provider of cultivars for that market. Nearly 60% of the market is still growing proprietary, I'm sorry, not proprietary, university derived cultivars. And the rest of that is made up with mostly proprietary companies like Driscoll's. Many would know that name. So that's to give you a context of why the importance of strawberries here in California. So I'm going to take us back to how did it all get started. So the two breeders that first started the program were Dr. Harold Thomas. In particular, he started it. He was back in those days, this is in the early 1900s, there wasn't a UC Davis yet. And so he was a scientist at UC Berkeley, and he was the strawberry breeder geneticist that was hired to develop this program. And he later brought on Earl Goldsmith to be the strawberry breeder and superintendent of the San Jose Field Station, which was a satellite of the UC Berkeley University. And Dr. Thomas, the reasons for starting the program were there. The Southern Bay area was a very big fruit growing area. Here's an old picture that I gleaned looking down upon that San Jose Field Station. And you can see there's no houses, very different. And of course, they used to grow all kinds of fruit trees. So 1927 is when Dr. Thomas joined the Berkeley faculty, and he started the program. And one of the individuals that helped start the program was a fellow named Albert Edders. He was a Swiss immigrant that lived up in Humboldt County in an area along the Maddle River. There actually is a little town up there called Edwardsburg now. It's just just a tiny little town. But and he started his own breeding program in the early 1900s, and he brought in germplasm from Chile of wild species Fragaria chiloensis, and and then he brought in strawberries that were grown across the United States and developed his own little breeding program. He also bred other kinds of fruit, but strawberry was one of his big interests. And so, but then at some point in time during the early 1900s, he started getting viruses into his strawberries, and it was problematic. And so he just donated his whole collection to UC. And that was kind of the starting point for the program that Dr. Thomas started. And he, back in those days, in the early 1900s, there used to be a breeding station in every single state, pretty much across the country. And strawberries were grown in every state. And it was a different kind of crop. And it was a very small window of time when fruit was available. And so it was grown near you, and it wasn't the kind of crop that it is today. And so there was a lot of sources of genetic material from across the country that Dr. Thomas started with and started his program. And then of course, Earl Goldsmith is another important early innovator that joined Dr. Thomas with the program. And he was more of the field breeder, and Dr. Thomas was more of the geneticist. He started in 1934. And of course, he was the superintendent of the San Jose field station. So they were working on strawberries for many years until they left. Well, like I said, Albert Eder was this individual that was the key that started a new germplasm. And it was really unique because it was including wild strawberries that were growing on the coast of California. And so it was really novel genetics that were brought in, different than all the other genetics that was found across the United States. And again, back to what Jenna said, is my interest in integrating wild genetics into commercial crops. That's what this fellow did. And so it was quite interesting. The germplasm that he developed was genetically very different than kind of the rest of the germplasm that existed in all the breeding programs throughout the United States. And so that set the UC program apart from all the others around the world. And so that was, again, the material that Thomas and Goldsmith used to develop their first cultivars. And so in 1944, Harold Thomas and Earl Goldsmith, they left the university. It was the understanding that the university was losing interest in having a program, and so they left, and they started the Driscoll Strawberry Associates, which later becomes Driscoll's Berry, the Driscolls that we know today. And they did that in the San Jose and Watsonville area. As they did that, they left with they purchased the genetics that they had developed, and in 1945 they released 5 varieties. Some of these that you may still be aware of today, because you can still go to nurseries and buy these old varieties called Shasta, Lassen, Sierra, Tahoe, and Donner. Shasta is probably the one that most people would be accustomed to finding in the nursery. But anyways, those materials were the first cultivars that came out from UC and were sold into the industry at that time. And the industry at that time was very small here in California relative to what it is today. And then those guys left with the same genetics to go start the Driscoll's program. So the Driscoll's program has a lot of that same starting points. So in 1946, so a year later, the university was apparently wasn't interested in continuing the program, but at the same time, in 46, they had hired this fellow named Victor Voth as a strawberry researcher in the Department of Pomology, and he was here on campus at that time in 1946, and the pomology department was just getting started. And of course, at that time, UC Davis was still a arm of, it was called the farm for UC Berkeley. And then in 1952, they hired a professor named Roy Springhurst as the geneticist, and he was brought on to lead the revitalization of the strawberry breeding program. And so that's when the program on all those genetics came here to UC Davis, and were grown here. And actually, for those that have been out to Winners, and there's a farm out there called the Wolfskill Ranch, and it's just off of Puda Creek Road. That Wolfskill Ranch is where the strawberry research has been done since the 40s, the mid 40s, and where we continue to do it today. So here's a couple pictures of Roy Springhurst and Victor Voth. And again, they both, similar to Thomas and Goldsmith, where one was more of a professor geneticist type, and then the other a field breeder. And so that's what we have here with Roy Springhurst and Victor Voth. And they bred strawberries from the 50s till, Victor Voth retired in 1991. So for 35, 40 years. And during that time, so in 56, Victor Voth transferred down to the UC South Coast Research and Extension Center in Irvine, California. The center still exists today, but now it's totally surrounded by city. But at that time, that was a very active agricultural area of Orange County, and so they were doing work on subtropical fruit, and that was where Victor then started developing strawberries for those southern growing regions. And in the beginning of the industry, strawberries were known as what we call a June-bearing crop. June-bearing meaning that you got fruit in May and June, and that was about it. And it had to do with the flowering response. It's called a short day flowering response. And so once the day length gets too long in the spring, they stop flowering, and that's it. That's all the fruit you're going to get. So, and that was really the southern growing regions of California were perfect for that type of berry, for also to get those berries into the market sooner versus later. And so even though at that time strawberries were grown from San Diego all the way up to the Watsonville area, there were a lot more acres in the south than there are today. And part of that is because they've been supplanted with houses. But anyways, Victor went to there and started focusing on those short day types. In 1964, Springhurst and Voth introduced a really important variety at that time. It was called Tioga. And at that time, it made up about half of the acreage in the state. And really what set it apart was that it was developed for a fresh market. And in that time, most of the strawberries that were grown, you'd have a small window of time when strawberries would be available, self-pick or whatever. You go to the farmer's market and get it. But it wasn't something you found in the store. And it was a big freezer crop. Most of the crop went to freezer or processing products. And so that started to change in the late 60s and early 70s. And part of that reason was because this particular variety was significantly firmer than all the other fruit. And when you look at the old exotic germplasm, it's got really soft fruit. You barely can pick it and not squeeze it and squish it. And so the firmness was a really important part of making the crop it is today, which is something that you'll put on a truck and ship across the country. And Tioga was the base of that. The other thing that Springhurst brought in, and it was really an important trait, was a flowering trait, what we call day neutrality. And so, as I had indicated earlier, strawberries had this short day response, and this day neutrality gene means that it'll flower any time of the year, and especially if it's got good cool conditions. Strawberries they like to live near the beach, like all of us do. And so to be able to grow and flower and produce all year long, you need those cooler temperatures. Now, once it starts getting into the 80s, then strawberries can struggle. And so this trait that Roy Springhurst developed was something that he collected in the mountains from a wild species in Utah. His family was a Mormon family from Utah, and he used to go back there and visit his family. And this was up in the mountains outside of Salt Lake City that he found this wild, and then he integrated it into the germplasm, and then he developed this trait, which we now call day neutrality. That trait has become very important because it creates an ability to produce strawberries over a long period of time. And now we have windows of basically in the state of California where we're picking strawberries in the field from January to December. That trait alone has caused that ability of the market to produce those strawberries year round, which of course then has also just grown the whole fresh market access to berries. So again, talking about why is UC doing what they're doing and the importance of the UC program. So, I had indicated those first berries that were varieties that came out in the 40s. There were a few more in the 50s. They weren't that important. It was really not until the 60s that, like Tioga was 1964. But the day neutrality trait really came into play later and starts to come in the early 70s. And we start having different varieties of both day neutral and short day types. So here's just a graphic that shows that, from 68 through 2015, there were 39 cultivars developed. And those were all very important varieties for the industry. The industry during the early years was mostly utilizing UC varieties. Driscoll's was pretty much the only company out there that had their own material. But over time, the proprietaries have grown, and there are a few other companies out there that develop their own varieties. But Driscoll's is by far and away the largest of the proprietary growers, and they have their own marketing model for bringing varieties to market. And they also market fruit, so it's more of a vertically integrated process. But the UC is a public program that creates varieties that are available to anybody and everybody. So of those 39 cultivars that have been developed in that time, and 2015 is a critical point to talk about, just because that's the point when Steve and I came on board, and those were all the varieties that had been developed prior to Steve Knapp, who is the professor and the geneticist who I work with, and is in charge of the whole program, director of the whole program. We started in 2015. So prior to that, this time, these are all the varieties that were developed. Of those varieties, two of them in particular, Camarosa and Chandler, both short day varieties, make up about 50% of all the acres that are numbers of plants that have been sold over the years. The royalty, there's a royalty system for the varieties. They're all patented varieties. The royalties come into the university to help fund the program and to help fund a lot of things that go on in the agricultural sector of the university, funding students, aside from just strawberry students, any agricultural student in the system. And so the money has gone to a lot of places and very productive for the university. So again, back to Voth and Springhurst, who were, seminal breeders, geneticists for the program. Springhurst retires in 1989. The variety Camarosa comes out in 92, but again, had started before that time. And then Chandler was another important variety. Chandler is still grown today. In fact, if you go to any of your little strawberry growers around the towns here, they'll oftentimes will be growing Chandler, and it's a very flavorful fruit, but it doesn't tend to be as firm as the fruit that you can find in the market. But it's very popular and still grown, and can handle the heat that we have here in the valley. And then Victor Voth retired in 1991. So at that time, that change time, a couple other individuals were brought on to replace both Springhurst and Voth. And so Dr. Doug Shaw was hired in 1986 and worked in conjunction with Springhurst for a couple years before he retired in 1989. And then subsequently in 1991, Kirk Larson was brought on, and he was the breeder that focused on the short day germplasm for the South Coast, and he was down in Irvine. So these two individuals then spent the next 30 years until 2015. 30 years for Doug Shaw, 30 years for Doug Shaw, and developed all the varieties that had been used during that time, and which also during that time, the UC program was focused on California, but it became an international importance, because the genetics coming from this program were then, and started with Voth and Springhurst, went out across the world and developed programs around the world. So the UC genetics is in a lot of programs all over the world, and has been the basis of genetic improvement in strawberry programs all over the world. And during the time of Shaw and Larson, that became even more important, because the UC program also started selling their strawberries. This is in the 90s, started selling their strawberries all over the world. And so that variety Camarosa that we talked about, the reason that so much was sold was it went and started the Spanish industry. And so in Southern Europe, there's the big markets for strawberry production for the whole continent are Spain and Morocco and places like that. So the UC program then moved those genetics across the world, and they're sold all over the world. And so the UC program is well renowned for the genetics that have provided the products over the last 30 years. Here's just a little graphic to show the scope and scale of the growth of California. So there's a list of all kinds of countries, states that were used to be considered primo strawberry growing states. You can see the acres that have existed in those states over that time. The only one that's grown a little bit is Florida, and that's because of the fresh market. All those other states, the strawberries that they grow go into either into processing products, frozen jams, etc., ice creams. Oregon's a big state for for strawberries that go into ice cream, for example. But California, the growth of California has been because of the growth of fresh market strawberries, and the firmness and the yields of the UC material was driven that that growth of that product type, enabling growers to grow and ship across the country. You know, firmness is a really important part. You need to be able to stay fresh and not start to rot. And so, and then the other piece that's helped grow this is the fact that you've got more of a year-round production, and that's again been driven by that day neutrality trade. And then here again is just a look at acres, yields per acre. So yields per acre have significantly risen in California because of the breeding program and because of that day neutrality trade. You're going to get more yield through a season if you can grow it over more months. Here's just a look at some key varieties over that time frame. Again, the 90s being the time when it became more of an international crop, and sold a lot more overseas than we sold in California. That has started to change over time because of a lot of proprietary companies starting and developing their own programs. And again, a lot of those programs were all started with a core base of genetics. So here's just a list of some different products over that time frame. Here in California, this slide just gives you an idea of the scale of the number of plants that are sold every year, which drives the royalty stream for the university. So since the 90s, it's been over 1 billion plants a year, and so it's a significant revenue driver from those royalties. But what's interesting here is that you can really see the importance of the day neutral gene coming into play from starting about early 2000s, and it's taking off. And now more and more of the acres are being grown these day neutral types. And again, it's because of the extension of the season, that there's more variation of genetics through breeding over time. And the short days here, at least in this state, have significantly dropped. And a lot of that too was because a lot of those short days were grown from Ventura south, and most of those growing regions have really diminished, with the exception of the Oxnard Ventura region, where there's a significant short day or strawberry growing region, and that's basically all short day types. So again, Steve and I, we came on board in 2015. Steve first. It was a big deal hiring Steve to come on board and take over the program, partly because there was also some controversy about the retirement of the 2 previous breeders, Sean Larson, and them wanting to start their own strawberry company, and their belief that they owned the genetics that they'd been working on for 30 years. And they didn't own it. And of course, a lawsuit entailed between UC and their company. And so it was very controversial at the time. And Steve was brought on board to take charge of the program and revitalize it again. He hired me shortly thereafter, and I'm more focused on the field end of things. And Steve was also put in charge of revitalizing the whole academic component of that. And we really wanted to build that and start focusing on the new sciences of today, which are genomics, and how to apply, those genetic tools for the improvement of strawberry, and to have, educate students in strawberry research. So that's our mission, is to deliver genetically superior cultivars to conventional organic strawberry farmers in California primarily, and then around the world as an ancillary side shoot of the work that we do in California. We've got a stewardship of all those UC genetics, and so we have to maintain these genetics. It's a clonal crop. Strawberries produce little runners that is your clone, and so we have to maintain all those genetics to maintain. It's not like putting a seed in a vault and saying, "Oh, I want to grow it next year." You have to yearly maintain those plants. Because of the controversy around the two previous breeders, transparency of our activity is very important. There was some kind of underhanded things that went on, and so that's a critical component of our work, is to be transparent with everything we do for the industry. And then again, of course, the education of students. And so Steve has a whole group of PhD and postdoctorate scientists, and it's all about generating information, publicly derived information for the industry of the science that we're working on. Little scope of where we are in the state. It's a year-round activity doing strawberry breeding. We are up and down the state. So we're here at Davis, where we have the students, where we have myself is here, and we do disease testing here at the university. Our Wolfskill Orchard in Winters is where we maintain all of our genetics, and it's also where we grow out our new breeding populations every year and make selections that go into yield trials. How do we develop clones for those yield trials? Is we use high elevation nurseries up in the Butte Valley north of Mount Shasta. As you drive up towards Klamath Falls, it's a big valley where all the nursery companies that grow strawberry plants for the berry growing industry, they're grown at these high elevations. I haven't talked about all the components of the industry, but that's a really critical part, because years ago it was the growers learned that if you grow strawberry plants in high elevations where they get chill hours before they get harvested in the fall, those chill hours give you a more vigorous plant, and that's what's used to plant all the berry growing fields across the state. And so that's something unique about our industry here in California. Even things that get used, they are grown in Florida, that are grown in the high elevation of California. Those plants are shipped to Florida for their market. So we do our own, all of the things that we trial go into that clonal nursery every year, and then we create the plants that we're going to go plant into our trials. Up and down the state is where those trials are, and we grow from Ventura up to Watsonville. We've got a large group of people. I manage our field breeding team down in the blue down there, across the different areas. I've got two associates, one that just got hired in Ventura and another one in Watsonville. They run all of our trials. And then, of course, Steve has his whole group of students, PhD candidates, and then postdoctoral scientists and scholars. That is kind of always kind of changing. Just had kind of some leave and some come in, and so it's always fluctuating. So again, the role of the public program is to create variety. A critical part is to create varieties for the industry. So let's see. We're out of time here. So we started our own breeding populations in 2015, and then of course we had limited information on starting those breeding populations. And as we've done testing over the subsequent years, every year has gotten better with our focus on projects for the breeding activities that we're doing, through yield data collection, through disease trial collection. One of the big things that we wanted to do was ingress a lot of germplasm to impact the disease resistance, to improve the disease resistance, to improve flavor and aroma compounds. And so we've done a lot of novel integrations from wild species, from old exotic germplasm, to bring in a lot of that genetic diversity. And then a big thing happened, before Steve and I started, but that was methyl bromide has been used in the industry for years. It was something that also helped the industry really grow and expand in the 60s and 70s, because with methyl bromide, you could kill everything in the soils, and that made it a much more productive crop. And so during those years, basically breeders were breeding for yield, and that was about it. Well, several years ago, a ban on the use of methyl bromide went into place. And so that has, for the most part, been totally eliminated as a tool to be used in the industry. It was the most effective tool, and the other tools that are available don't do the same kind of soil sterilization that methyl bromide did. And because of that, now we're starting to see more and more diseases. And so that has been a major focus. Here's a field. This is a field near Watsonville that is totally infected with fusarium. Fusarium is a disease that now is really starting to take off, and so we're focused on developing disease resistance cultivars for the industry, and the science behind that disease resistance. And so we have to bring disease resistance, but at the same time, we need to make sure that the crop has yield, and that those things can oftentimes negatively correlated depending on the source of your disease resistance. The other thing that we're focused on is improvement of flavor and aroma compounds as part of that post-harvest quality. And we've got the firm fruits, we've got big fruit, we need to improve flavor. And so we're using traditional breeding methodologies, and we're starting to use the new genomic and genetic tools to help address some of those problems. And so fusarium is a really critical one. And so we looked at a lot of genetics early in 15 and 16, so that we could identify sources of resistance. Here's a little graph showing that we've got resistant and susceptible phenotypes. But in that left-hand corner is where we found the good stuff. And so those good things are things that we can work on for integration into the program. But one of the things that we found with one of our students was her project for her thesis. We found that on chromosome 2, you can see a little peak there. It's, dots that go up the graph here. This is identification that there's a spot on that chromosome, the end of that chromosome, where there's probably a gene for resistance, a single gene for resistance. And that's what we found. And we've been able to develop a genetic marker for that. And now we can, and we're utilizing this tool now. As we grow our seedlings, we're able to punch those leaves for a little leaf disc and provide a sample so we can do a genetic test. And we can screen through all these, and I can then plant in the field those things that only have fusarium resistance. That has been a tool that's been developed since we came on board because of the genomics work that we did to map the genome of strawberry. We came out with a landmark paper on the mapping of that octopoid genetics, which is very complex genetic system. And that has been the tool, the platform that we've been able to build a tool to develop these markers. So I know we're getting past my time. Flavor is really important and sugar is really important, so we're working on that. And recently we did this is actually a wine group, but we did do a strawberry sensory theater test with some new cultivars that we got coming forward. And so that's a big part of our future, is getting at the understanding of what are the metabolites that go into aroma development and other fruit quality components, sugar, acid, etc., and try to figure out what they are, which ones are good, and then go after and breed for them. So I'll just move on. We have some new varieties that just came out last year. Warrior and Victor. Warrior is a very disease-resistant variety for the short days, and Victor, high-yielding short day that was named in honor of Victor Voth. And in the day neutrals, we have Royal Royce, Valiant, and Moxie. And again, the Royal Royce in honor of Roy Springhurst. So I'm a little bit past my time, so I'm going to say thank you and then open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Glenn. That was very interesting. I myself am learning so much about strawberries, which, I figured was just such a simple thing, going to the market and picking them up or getting them at the local fruit stands. Just to kind of kick us off with questions, which just a reminder to everyone, please feel free to submit any questions you have for Glenn using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. I am, taking stock of everything that's coming in here. Just to kind of get us started, thinking around, you touched on this a little bit in terms of flavor and sweetness. What is it that makes strawberries particularly sweet? And are there sweeter varietals in our region that we can look out for?
Yeah, so one of the things that we learned through one of our grad students in his thesis was over time, there's been this breeding for varieties that are firmer and that can be shipped. And that's also tied to yield. So these higher yielding things tend to be these firmer berries. Well, we learned through his thesis that sugar and yield and firmness are negatively correlated. So the softer it is, the sweeter it's going to be. And that means that it's something that's tougher to go into the market. So to answer your question on sweetness, I said Chandler is really popular. It's still found in the farmer's market. It's sweeter than the stuff that is commercially grown. And so you can find older varieties like that, but you're not going to find them in the marketplace, generally speaking. So that's why there's a big push for breeding programs to find that fine line between the yield, the firmness, and the sugar.
Excellent. A question from Sarah. She's wondering if there's a book that discusses the history of strawberry breeding in California that's available.
No, not really. There's see, I'm looking on my bookshelf here. There's a book called The Strawberry, which is a historical about strawberries from the early 1900s through the 60s. And it's called The Strawberry. It's written by Darrow. He was in one of those pictures that I showed with Henry Thomas. That's available. As far as California, no, there's not. Okay. I will say that there was a student here that left, got his PhD. Let me look at, I think I gave, oh, here it is. Just show it to you. Called Strawberries. And John Hancock was a student with Roy Springhurst. He wrote this. This is basically, he went on to Michigan. He wrote this. It's about strawberries. It's a lot of information. And it's a good book. It's got a lot of historical, but nothing that I would just be California.
Thank you for that. She said she'll check those out. In terms of, I was very interested in you touched briefly on the sensory theater. Testing, what is that process like?
So, yeah, so we did that for this first go round last year with these new products that we're going forward with. And we're still learning. But that process was twofold, was developing an expert panel that then went through all the different tasting components, and they reviewed and tested the varieties. And then the other part of that was more of a public. And so we brought in 100 people, and they came in and they just gave a simple sensory testing. And the Mondavi Center does this, is available. They do it with wine and beer, and they do it with other fruits and vegetables. And so you'll oftentimes see something in the news saying, oh, come down to, you can become part of that sensory group and come and do the testing. And we did that with the strawberries. It was open to people, and we had 100 people that came at 2 different times. We'll be doing that again. The bigger important piece, though, is that we're collaborating with another scientist on campus who's he's a metabolite scientist. And so we've got a new project that we're going for getting funding on from the USDA and from the state to get at what are the compounds. We know that there are 300 volatiles in strawberries that create aromas and tastes, and but there's about 30 that are probably the more important ones. And out of those 30, there's probably 10 that are really important. So we're trying to identify all those qualities and identify sources of material that are better for those qualities, and then understanding the synthesis process for those compounds. So that's the future innovations we're looking to improve upon.
Excellent. Just to kind of tie into our work here on the property, we have a large collection of historical agricultural tools and inventions that have aided the agricultural growth in California and across the country. Has there been a particular piece of farm equipment or technology that's been particularly instrumental in the development of strawberry varietals?
Well, I guess I had a picture and then I took it out, but one thing that's changed over time, in the 40s, back when they used to grow in the early 40s and 50s, it was basically on these tiny little beds that were pretty low to the ground. And at that time, it was a lot of Japanese families that were the farmers of strawberries. You'd see people sitting on the ground picking strawberries into baskets. Today, in California, it's almost still all grown in the field, but they have these big beds that they grow them on. So that bed development was a really significant part. And so there's special bed makers, and they grow them in sandy areas, so it's easier to get these beds big. And then of course plastic and mulching has been important. So that the equipment to do that.
Absolutely. Another aspect that I'm interested in is the decentralization, right? In the beginning, you were mentioning that, every state had kind of a breeding center and would be growing its own strawberries. But based on the graphs you were showing, it really does look like a lot of the strawberry production that we have access to these days is happening in California and Florida along the coast. So is there some particular reason why that happened, or was it just kind of ideal climate, or how did that come to be?
A lot of that was just, again, about the length of the time of the year the berries would be available and the length of time they'd be available. And so in a lot of those other states, there's a small window of time. They're still grown in states, North Carolina, Massachusetts, but it's all small production. It's usually geared to U-picks but the bulk of the crop comes from those 2 states. And it's because Florida starts picking in December, and it goes all the way till April, and that's too hot. California has 3 types: short day, day neutral, and what we call summer plants. And those types there's fruit coming off of those types year round in California. That's what makes California the one where all of the fruit is coming from.
Excellent. I'll go ahead and open it up if there's any final questions from the group to go ahead and come in. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and share my screen And just kind of up at the top there, we do have the link to the UC Davis Strawberry Breeding Program if you want to go check out more of their work and what they're doing, followed by links to the YOLO Arts website, particularly to our Art Farm Gala that's coming up. So be sure to check those out. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram to stay up to date on events like Knowledge at Noon, and other programs that we have going on. Glenn, thank you so much for your time today. I myself am bursting with more information, and I don't know, I love summer fruits. Now I'm just ready to go and get more strawberries and get more fruits going for to round out the rest of my summertime.
Right. Go eat those strawberries.
Excellent. Well, with that, we will go ahead and wrap up today. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and hopefully we will see you on September 9th for a history talk on historical architecture.